Fighting Force is a 3D beat-em-up from the team that created Tomb Raider. I previously played the N64 version and thought it was good. Nothing special, but it was still pretty fun. So I decided to check out the PS1 game. Now that I actually know how to play it, I should have a lot more fun with this one than I did with the N64 version, where I was just sort of bumbling around like an idiot. Let's go over the story really quick. A mad scientist thought the world was going to end in 2000. It didn't, and because it did not end, he went even crazier, apparently, and decided that he needed to end the world himself. Somehow, he got a bunch of people to go along with his plan, and you have to go defeat him. I love how in all these games, the rest of the world cares so little about what's happening that no one decides to actually help our heroes. It's just up to, the 4 playable characters to deal with all this shit. It's just really funny to me. I have no idea why no one tried to help them, and I have no idea why I'm guessing the organization they work for didn't send more than 4 people. It would be a very different game if it did, though, so I'm kind of glad they didn't. I do like the story for Fighting Force. It just sets everything up in a nice little package. You know who you're fighting and why you have to beat them up. It's just a nice way of doing things. It's not anything special, but with games like this, it doesn't need to be special. It just needs to give you a reason why you're doing what you're doing. And then you can go punch bad guys in the face. The gameplay in Fighting Force is very good. Like many beat-em-ups, the game can be a bit repetitive, but you can at least save your game and come back to it later. That probably sounds like an odd thing to praise in a game like this, but that was something new for beat-em-ups back in 1997. The manual is available online, which is really nice, especially if you only have the disc, or if you're playing this on an emulator. This is one of the few games on the PS1 that I don't have complete, so having access to the manual was awesome, especially when I just didn't know some of the controls. This helped out quite a bit. There weren't too different from the N64 version, but the button placement was obviously different from that, so just being able to look it up was pretty great. There are 4 playable characters in this, which is nice. It's a little bit of a change from the usual 3. I didn't notice a big difference between them. It feels more like a personal preference. There might be some minor statistical differences, but by and large, I didn't really notice anything major or anything like that. Like most beat-em-ups, you get a bunch of items and weapons to help you along the way. For some reason, the developers decided to keep in points and bonus points. I don't really think this is necessary anymore, but hey, they decided to keep it in. I know it's a holdover from arcade games, but Fighting Force was never in the arcades. It's just a strange thing that doesn't really need to be in here, and it's a very minor complaint from me, by the way. It's not all that important that they have points and bonus points. I just find it a little weird in a console game. Overall, I like the gameplay quite a bit. The PS1 doesn't have a whole lot of beat-em-ups on it, so yeah, this one was pretty good. It's just kind of weird that with a system that has over 2,000 games on it, that, you don't have a lot of beat-em-up games. It's a genre that's really underrepresented. If you're looking for a good beat-em-up, this is a pretty decent one, or if you're just looking for a beat-em-up on the PS1, this is a pretty decent one. Definitely check it out. The gameplay is pretty good. Like many games released in the mid-1990s, the camera is really your biggest enemy. It isn't too bad in Fighting Force, but it becomes an issue when the enemies get guns and they start shooting you from off-screen. That's just a pain in the ass, and it's something that really shouldn't happen. For a game released in 1997, Fighting Force looks pretty good. The character models are understandably blocky, their movements are a little awkward at times. It is what you should expect from a 3D game made at this time. The levels look very good for 97. It's easy to tell when you can destroy something and where the items might be located, so that's kind of fun. Uh, yeah, it's not too bad. Some of the health items, I have no frickin' idea what they are. I think they're supposed to be like med kits, but they just kind of look like a sandwich that's laying on the ground. I'm honestly not sure what it's supposed to be, but at least it was healing me, so I didn't have a huge problem with it. Targeting opponents is fairly easy. I had some issues when kind of the enemies gathered around me, but that was just more of a genre trope than anything else. This part of the visuals doesn't like negatively impact the game at all. It's one of those things that just happens in a lot of beat 'em ups. You're gonna get ganged up on by a bunch of different people. The graphics and the visuals are pretty good. My biggest issue is really just the camera. It's not the worst camera in any video game, but it does create a few issues every once in a while. Fighting Force was a pretty average game, and it received average reviews for the time. I picked out 4 reviews to look at for this. Some of them are a little weird, but for the most part, they all kind of agree with each other. GameFan had 3 people review this game. They all expressed some disappointment with it, mostly because they had higher expectations for the game. It sounds a little strange to me, just reading through what they said. I can only guess they wanted something innovative and new, which is odd for a genre that doesn't really do that. And this one definitely didn't. It stuck to a pretty safe formula and didn't try anything. So, yeah, it's just kind of a weird review. Game Informer, they gave it a 6.5 out of 10. This one was strange. It invoked the title of Hardcore Gamers, and then seemingly takes a shot at Die Hard the Arcade for some reason. It's not a very long review, and it comes off as being rather elitist. They do praise the graphics and the gameplay, and then complain about the load times, which I think is fair. This game does have very long load times. IGN gave the game a 5.5 out of 10 and suggested that players should probably rent before they buy it, which is something you could say about every game from the 1990s. It was probably best to rent anything before you bought it. So, yeah, it's a statement that you can tack onto every review. They praised the graphics, but called the game repetitive. This is something you can complain about with every beat 'em up, though. I don't really think it's a huge problem, especially when it comes to something like Fighting Force. I think there's enough variety in it that it's not too repetitive. GameSpot called the game an uninspiring stab at 3D Final Fight or Streets of Rage. Some of what the author said is pretty fair, but it kind of meanders into hyperbole more often than not. It seems like he was suggesting that you rent it before you buy it, and yeah, I would agree with that. It probably would have been better to just rent this thing on the weekend instead of going out and buying it right away. Again, it's something that you should probably do for every game, or at least you should have probably done for a lot of games back in the 1990s. The reviews were just a little strange. I should point out that at the time the review scores were average and not bad. None of these reviews that I looked at called this a bad game. They only suggested that you rent it first. I don't fully understand the repetitive gameplay comment. This is something you could play, or you could say about many games. All of them have repetitive gameplay. It's not, anything that's really bad. It's just something that happens with a video game. You find a loop of gameplay and then you repeat it. So you could kind of say that about anything. Maybe monotonous would be a little bit better because it can get a little tiresome just punching and kicking enemies and occasionally smacking them with something. But again, it's something that you're going to do in a lot of video games. I would have complained more about a lack of a block button or some kind of a dodge button instead. I like the PS1 version of this game a little bit more than the N64 version. It might be that I just know how to play the game now, and with the N64 version, I did not, so that might have something to do with it. But I think the gameplay's pretty fun, the controls were nice, the graphics look good, and the story's pretty fun. The only real knock on it is just the bad camera. That's probably the only bad thing with this game. This is one of the many games I feel like I missed out on. I wish I had played it back in 1997, or 98 or 99 or whatever. But, it's cool that you get to go back and play it now. It's a pretty nice game. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.